You ever wonder what it might be like to read a book that was intentionally written in the most boring way possible? Yeah, me neither. Can you imagine what it would have been like to write something like that? Oof. No wonder it took David Foster Wallace 10 years to write this thing. And then he never even finished it. Some have even suggested that it may have contributed to his tragic and untimely death. If reading something like that sounds like an overall unpleasant experience for you, I've got good news. I read The Pale King, so you don't have to. Let's jump into it.
We're gonna have to develop some real machinery inside our guts to turn off pure unalloyed pleasure, or I don't know about you, I'm gonna have to leave the planet, because the technology is just gonna get better and better, and it's gonna get easier and more convenient and more pleasurable to sit alone with images on a screen given to us by people who do not love us but want our money. And that's fine in low doses, but if it's the basic main staple of your diet, you're gonna die.
The Pale King is David Foster Wallace's final, unfinished novel. It was published in 2011, 3 years after his death. The unfinished manuscript was left on his desk for his publishers to go and find and try to piece together all of the disparate pieces of notes, unfinished chapters, little vignettes, into something resembling a cohesive whole. But what we have and what we know today as The Pale King is a strange, often confusing, kind of super boring piece of literature from David Foster Wallace. So you don't have to look very long at the discourse around this book to find out that the book is kind of about boredom. Why would you write a book about boredom, you ask? Great question. You're paying attention, but just hold your horses, all right? Calm down. I'm going to explain the book to you, okay? Just chill out. In order to delve into the depths of boredom, Wallace sets the Pale King in the most dull possible locale imaginable, a local IRS office. The story, if you can really call it that, follows several different narrators, all of them workers at the IRS, either veterans or new hires, as they navigate the vicissitudes of the absolutely mind-numbing, soul-sucking boredom that is working at the IRS. Are you interested yet? To my mind, there are probably two possible reactions to that pitch. The first one, being the sane one, oh, it's a book about boredom that's meant to invoke the feeling of boredom, and it's about the IRS, and it's unfinished, so the plot doesn't really resolve, and the character arcs don't really resolve, and so the whole kind of thing kind of goes nowhere and is boring the whole time.
My gut is telling me to throw this book in the trash.
Well,
It's
yeah.
absolute nonsense.
And then there's the second, not so sane reaction.
No question about it, I am ready to get hurt again.
I don't think I really understood what loneliness was when I was a young man, and now I've got a much less clear idea of what the point of art is, but I think it's got something to do with loneliness and something to do with setting up a conversation between human beings.
So I'm not really going to sum up the plot here because there's not really a plot to sum up at the end of the day. It's a pretty thematic work. It's a lot of vignettes and that kind of thing. Damn, there's so many bugs out here, man. Wallace's editor even included a little note that he found at the end of his unfinished manuscripts that reads, embryonic outline, 2 broad arcs. 1, paying attention, boredom, ADD, machines versus people at performing mindless jobs. 2, being individual versus being part of larger things, paying taxes, being lone gun in IRS versus team player. Central deal, realism, monotony. Plot a series of setups for stuff happening, but nothing actually happens. So given that, first of all, those supposed arcs are not really arcs, they're more themes, and second of all, that it seems like any plot setups that actually do happen in the book were intentionally set up as red herrings and don't actually go anywhere, I feel pretty confident in saying that The Pale King is mostly a thematic work. Think of it like the IRS variations, if you will. So just forget about plot for a little while and let's get started with the big theme, boredom. Boredom, if you think about it, kind of makes an ingenious topic for a book, because it's one of those things that we all experience, like death, or the weather, or taxes, come to think about it. But what role does it actually play in the book? How does one write a book about boredom? Critic Ralph Clare, in his essay published in Studies in the Novel about a year after The Pale King was published, sums it up rather nicely, saying, Wallace is primarily interested in exploring the roots of boredom as a specific historical formation of late capitalist American life. What Wallace does in The Pale King is conduct a thorough analysis of how boredom has functioned and continues to function socially, culturally, and politically in the age of neoliberal capitalism. In doing so, Wallace engages in a kind of aesthetics of boredom, which examines boredom in both the novel's form and content, and offers a possible solution to the apparent malaise of post-industrial life. Let's unpack that for a second.
I hope this is a 4-hour segment.
So basically, there's one goal of the book, which is to be political. Wallace is literally trying to change your mind about culture and society as it works today. And second, along the way, he's going to intentionally try and bore you to absolute tears. If he had lived to finish this novel, it would have been absolutely impossible to publish. Just to really sell you on it, here's a great quote that I found from Zadie Smith. There are times when reading Wallace feels unbearable, and the weight of things stacked against the reader insurmountable. Missing context, rhetorical complication, awful people, grotesque or absurd subject matter, language that is at the same time childishly scatological and annoyingly obscure. Here's the most flagrant example of the boredom that Wallace is able to invoke in this book. Irrelevant Chris Fogel turns a page. Howard Cardwell turns a page. Ken Wax turns a page. Matt Redgate turns a page. Groovy Bruce Channing attaches a form to a file. Ann Williams turns a page. Anand Singh turns 2 pages at once by mistake and turns one back, which makes a slightly different sound.
Why are you the way that you are?
This goes on for 4 pages. Why on God's good green earth would somebody want to write a book like this? Well, Wallace wants to draw our attention to the fact that engaging in things that are torturously boring can sometimes reap some really fruitful rewards. And he embeds many of these different kinds of rewards for engaging in his aesthetic throughout the book, in its most boring and challenging sections. When I first encountered that section, for example, I'm not gonna lie, I skimmed it, right? I got the idea, I looked at it, and I was like, okay, so they're turning pages, they're attaching forms to files, we're supposed to see the drudgery and monotony of working at the IRS. I get it, I'm not gonna read the whole thing. But Clare, in his essay, points out that hidden, embedded between the sentences there, hiding in plain sight, are these little nuggets of thematic wisdom that are extremely relevant to understanding the book. Hidden randomly, sporadically throughout these affectless details are the sentences, devils are really angels, 2 clocks, 2 ghosts, 1 square acre of hidden mirror, and every love story is a ghost story. We'll get to the actual thematic content of those sentences in a little bit, but for now it suffices to say that hidden within boredom, within its pale dimensions, lies some transcendent insight.
No, there's this part that makes you feel full. There's this part that is redemptive and instructive, where when you read something, it's not just a light, you go, my God, that's me. You know, I've lived like that, I've felt like that, I'm not alone in the world. I mean, you can get very kind of abstract in the way you talk about it.
But before making it exactly clear what that transcendent insight is, Wallace makes the case politically, pretty early on in the novel, that we should be suspicious of things that appear to be super boring, and we should suspect that that boring stuff could potentially be obscuring some essential information or insight. So let me give you some context. One of those plot points that I was alluding to earlier, that incidentally is not really supposed to go anywhere, but is nevertheless set up early on in the novel, is some internal conflict within the IRS itself, between this sort of old guard and new guard. The old guard of the IRS were from that Lyndon Baines Johnson Great Society era, who saw taxation as a means of social justice. They believed in things like a social safety net, increasing equality, progressive taxing, etc., etc. While the new guard came in during the Reagan era. And during the Reagan era, what was valued were tax cuts, deregulation, Reaganomics, all that great stuff.
I suggested an across-the-board tax cuts and the elimination of unnecessary regulations.
Thank you very much, Reagan. Thank you. Appreciate that. It's great. Part of that new guard model was the attempt to remodel the IRS in the image of a corporation. That if we were going to cut taxes, we were going to have to also increase the efficiency of the IRS by instituting quotas and things like that for the tax workers in order to squeeze every last drop out of the taxpayers that was possible. Because, as it turns out, if you cut taxes, you decrease revenue, unless you can increase efficiency to make up for those tax cuts. Bored yet? Anyway, so that's the context for the following quote. Both then and now, very few ordinary Americans know anything about all this, nor much about the deep changes the service underwent in the mid-1980s, changes that today directly affect the way citizens' tax obligations are determined and enforced. And the reason for this public ignorance is not secrecy. Despite the IRS's well-documented paranoia and aversion to publicity, secrecy here has nothing to do with it. The real reason why U.S. citizens were/are not aware of these conflicts, changes, and stakes is that the whole subject of tax policy and administration is dull. Massively, spectacularly dull. There are things in life that are both extremely important and just brain-soupifyingly boring. I think we can all agree that taxes are important, whether you're a right-wing person who believes in that Reagan model of cutting taxes, deregulating business, freeing up the economy and the free market for innovation and growth, or more of that left-wing idea of progressive taxes, higher taxation in general, creation of a social safety net, regulation of business, all that kind of stuff. Either way, whatever side of the spectrum you lay on there, we can all agree that taxation is important. And we could all agree that we would just about rather do anything else than talk about taxes. This seems to have led Wallace to develop a really deep existential fear about the direction that our country was heading in. In chapter 19, for example, there's a character who starts musing on exactly this kind of existential dread. There's something very interesting about civics and selfishness, and we get to ride the crest of it. Here in the US, we expect government and law to be our conscience, our superego, you could say. Americans are in a way crazy. We infantilize ourselves. We don't think of ourselves as citizens, parts of something larger to which we have profound responsibilities. We think of ourselves as citizens when it comes to our rights and our privileges, but not our responsibilities. We abdicate our civic responsibilities to the government and expect the government, in effect, to legislate morality. As citizens, we cede more and more of our autonomy. But if we, the government, take away the citizens' freedom to cede their autonomy, we're now taking away their autonomy. It's a paradox. Citizens are constitutionally empowered to choose to default and leave the decisions to corporations and to a government we expect to control them. Corporations are getting better and better at seducing us into thinking the way they think, of profits as the telos, and responsibility as something to be enshrined in symbol and evaded in reality. Cleverness as opposed to wisdom. Wanting and having instead of thinking and making. We cannot stop it. I suspect what'll happen is that there will be some sort of disaster, depression, hyperinflation, and then it'll be showtime. We'll either wake up and retake our freedom, or we'll fall apart utterly, like Rome, conqueror of its own people.
There's a difference, though, I think, between being mildly bored, but then there's another kind of boredom that I think you're talking about, which is reading. Reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room, and I have friends intelligent friends who don't like to read because they get, it's not just bored. There's an almost dread about having to be alone and having to be quiet.
You know, I can't help but feel like Wallace was having a pretty prescient moment here. I mean, he was writing in like 2005 or something like that, and now it's 20 years later, and boredom has been all but completely vanquished. I mean, even in the DMV, the absolute epitome, the emblem of boredom itself, you can still sit there and watch TikTok and just brain melt, watching content specifically designed to hold your attention for infinite spans of time. You know, it does seem like the more that we become addicted to easily consumable content, the more that we cede our authority over to corporations and government officials who make decisions on our behalf about things that are not too complicated or anything like that for us to think about, but just too boring. Oh, it's just too boring. So let's see what Wallace has to say by way of advice for our unique 21st century dilemma. About midway through the novel, there's a chapter that runs about 100 pages, more or less the length of a novel in its own right, narrated by the character nicknamed Irrelevant Chris Fogel. He's nicknamed Irrelevant because he's constantly going on tangents and has a penchant for verbose, extraneous detail. The whole pretense of the chapter, which starts on page 156, is to explain why Fogel ended up in the IRS. He's gonna tell us exactly what happened in his life that inspired him to join the service. The sort of joke of the chapter is that he doesn't really get to that relevant moment that he decided to join the IRS until page 228. 72 pages of apparently completely extraneous and irrelevant and boring detail. And the worst part is that he keeps introducing the crux of his story as if he's just about to get to it before he gets distracted and goes on some other irrelevant tangent. All of this is meant to produce that feeling in the reader of anxious boredom, sitting on the edge of your seat. Oh my god, get to the point already. So here's the point. The point of the chapter about Chris Fogel is the day that he realizes that he's going to be an IRS agent is the same day that he accidentally walks into the wrong classroom at his college. He's a poli-sci major, he accidentally walks into a sort of tax accounting class. Even after he realizes that he's in the wrong class, he's too anxious and neurotic to just admit he made a mistake and get up and leave. So he sits there and he's observing the other students, and he's observing the way that they can pay attention to the lecture, even though the lecture is extremely dry and boring and he doesn't even understand what the guy's talking about because he has no context for the class, but he observes them as they are sort of sitting very still, they're not fidgety, they take very clean and organized notes, and they seem to be this kind of perfect image of what it means to concentrate and to attend. But anyway, it becomes apparent that this is actually the last day of this class, and the professor, who by the way is also a Jesuit, which is maybe symbolically significant, finishes his lecture and then offers a sort of speech to the students by way of summation, because it's the last class and he figures, well, I'll give you some sort of life advice. It's akin to like a Sermon on the Mount. I wish to inform you that the accounting profession to which you aspire is, in fact, heroic. Exacting, prosaic, banalistic to the point of drudgery, sometimes, often tedious, perhaps, but brave, worthy, fitting, sweet, romantic, chivalric, heroic? Gentlemen, here is a truth. Enduring tedium over time in a confined space is what real courage is. Such endurance is, as it happens, the distillate of what is today, in this world neither I nor you have made, heroism. Gentlemen, welcome to the world of reality. There is no audience, no one to applaud, to admire, no one to see you. Do you understand? Here is the truth. Actual heroism receives no ovation, entertains no one. No one queues up to see it. No one is interested. Critic James Dorson points out that we're not actually supposed to take the Jesuit speech at face value. As in, Wallace is not necessarily literally trying to tell us that we should all become accountants or something. He's not supposed to be a sort of boomerish role model telling us to all give up our art and stuff and just get a job in an office. Dorson suggests that what is important in the Jesuit speech and in the novel as a whole is not taxation or accounting as such, but what commitment to such principles entails. In other words, commitment to dull, unsexy, audienceless pursuits is the true path to authenticity and dignity. But commitment to such things entails, boredom. But how do we face boredom? I mean, it's so boring. I don't want to do it. Please don't make me do boring things. I'm not sure that Wallace was actually anywhere near offering us a true solution for how to become less distractible and less repulsed by boredom.
It's not just bored. There's an almost dread that comes up, I think.
But when he engages in that topic, this is where Wallace gets his most sort of mystical and even goes as far as to start to engage with a kind of Zen spirituality. For an example of the mysticism of the book, we get one of these vignettes later in the book about a little boy who decides that he is gonna try and press his lips to every square inch of his body. We don't really get an explanation for why he decides he's going to do this. It's just presented to us as the boy decided he was going to press his lips to every square inch of his body. Just go, okay, great. So we're doing that now. Awesome. But the boy really devotes himself to this task. First, he hurts himself and he has to go to a chiropractor and she teaches him how to stretch and stuff. So he starts to spend all of his time stretching in his room, meditatively, gaining a little bit of an inch of flexibility, gaining access to one more little section of his body at a time, pressing his lips against every single one of his parts. But there are a couple of swaths of his body that he starts to realize are going to be completely impossible for him to ever touch with his lips. Things like the middle section of his back, the underside of his chin, his forehead, the lips themselves. At this point, Wallace seems to go full Zen, even offering us a koan. Accessing the lips themselves appeared to be like asking a knife to cut itself. These sites occupied a near mythic place in the overall project. The boy revered them in such a way as to place them almost beyond the range of conscious intent. The accessibility of these last sites seemed so immense that it was as if their cast shadow fell across all the slow progress up toward the clavicle. A tenebrous shadow the boy chose to see as lending the enterprise a somber dignity rather than a futility or pathos. I think we can pretty simply draw a connection between the impossibility of maintaining completely uninterrupted, steady concentration that Wallace mentioned earlier, and the impossibility of this boy touching his lips to his own lips. Perhaps there's a kind of dignified tranquility to devoting yourself to such futile efforts.
In the way, that is the Tao, there is nothing to discipline oneself in. If there were, the completion of such discipline would be the destruction of the Tao. On the other hand, if there is no discipline at all, one remains an ignoramus.
Would we still be so twisted up in knots about our feelings about boredom if we understood that that kind of constant and uninterrupted concentration is just kind of impossible? If we just accepted that?
Now look hard at the television screen. Really look at it.
Another answer comes in yet another endlessly long chapter. It runs about 70 pages towards the end of the book, in which we get a conversation. The chapter is mostly dialogue between two characters named Shane Drinian and Meredith Rand. Shane Drinian, on the one hand, is painted as a kind of Zen monk. He's very cerebral and quiet. He takes things very literally. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't move. He's able to concentrate. On the other hand, there's Meredith Rand, who is portrayed in, honestly, kind of a sexist way. David Foster Wallace was a bit of a sexist. You know, if you feel like it, you can go ahead and look up a little bit about his history. Anyway, so This Meredith Rand, again, is kind of a sexist portrayal. She's kind of one of those stereotypical women who tell long, meandering stories full of superfluous detail that go on and on and on, that never really get to the point, that go on long tangents that don't really lead anywhere, and...
I don't give a D. What is that supposed to mean? Okay, you know what? Shoot. Get out of here. Shoot.
So she's meant to be portrayed as kind of the epitome of a boring person. She's self-obsessed, repetitive, tangential, needy, all that bad stuff. So in this scene, Meredith Rand is telling Drinian about the time she spent as an inpatient in a mental institution being treated for her self-harm. The root of her self-harm, it turns out, was her insecurities about how pretty and attractive she was. A little paradox starts to emerge as she realizes that people tend to only value her because of her prettiness and her attractiveness, so she develops a suspicion of other people, and that suspicion and obsession ends up kind of taking over her personality, thereby affirming other people's assumption that she's shallow and only has one personality trait, that being her prettiness. So the obsession ends up confirming the prejudgments of other people. And so she kind of ends up spinning her wheels a little bit about this. Anyway, their whole conversation about this is, again, meant to really bore the reader, to put us on the edge of our seat, waiting for her to just get to the point already. But as this is happening, we see that Shane Drinian, as he's listening and he's fully attentive, he's not getting bored, he's just focusing on every single thing that she's saying, he literally starts to levitate. His butt comes off of the seat, sitting there in the bar, listening to her blather on about her boring insecurities. So the function of Meredith Rand's story is really twofold. On the one hand, it's meant to show us that paying attention to boring stuff and maintaining complete concentration on them is akin to Zen monks levitating. And on the other hand, it's meant to call us back to that earlier chapter we talked about where it was describing the IRS agents endlessly turning boring pages of their tax documents. That chapter was hiding small nuggets of wisdom and thematic content that was relevant for the rest of the book. Meredith Rand's speech also, if you read it and engage with it and pay attention to it with a lot of detail, also holds a key theme that contextualizes a lot of the points of this book. So I believe that key, that hidden treasure, happens on page 500. It happens towards the end of a paragraph that goes on for like 2 full pages, where she's finally realizing how she's going to stop self-harming, or she's recalling her experience of realizing how to stop self-harming. The key, according to her, was immaturity. Immature in the sense of waiting or wanting some magical daddy or rescuer to see you and really know and understand you and care as much as your parents do and save you. Save you from yourself. My core problem was the neat little trap I'd made for myself to ensure that I never really had to grow up. And so I could stay immature and waiting forever for somebody to save me because I'd made it impossible for me to get what I was so convinced I needed and deserved. So I could always be angry, and I could always get to go around thinking that my real problem was that no one could see or love the real me the way I needed. So I'd always have my problem to sit and hold and stroke on and make believe was the real problem. I think this pretty clearly reflects one of the conclusions that one of the other characters made earlier that we mentioned about civics and selfishness. That we as Americans infantilize ourselves and look to the government to legislate morality, to act as our kind of daddy, to come in and save us. And as long as they are the ones that we're looking to save us and solve our problems, then when things continue to be bad, we can continue to look to them and say, they are our problem. Just like Rand is able to blame everybody else for her ultimately shallow personality. In reality, she says, everything was the surface. Because under the surface were just all these feelings and conflicts about the surface. The key, she says, is to just stop. It's a little bit difficult to parse, but I think what Wallace is trying to get us to understand is that Rand needs to make a change within herself. She needs to stop devoting all of her mental energy to shallow bullcrap and start engaging in real stuff. Boring stuff. We could all kind of use the rousing cold shower that is that Jesuit's speech. Sometimes what's important is also what's boring, and we need to face that boring stuff in order to be fully formed human beings. Responsible, dignified, intelligent, and resilient human beings. Anything you pay close, direct attention to becomes interesting. So anyway, I don't know, I hope that made sense. That's The Pale King. Let me know if you read it, if you enjoyed it. Throw me a like, you know, it's still a small channel. You should click the like button and you should subscribe, probably. I don't know, do what you want. I don't give a shit. You know, as far as the book goes, you know, I think there's a lot of good things to like about it. You know, if you're a big Wallace head, if you've read Infinite Jest and, you know, you want to get a little bit more of that sweet, tasty Wallace prose, then I guess I'd recommend it. You know, go for it. Anyway, yeah, just before we wrap up, you know, I wanted to bring it around town. Back to those little thematic little nuggets that we found in that chapter 19. Devils are really angels. Every love story is a ghost story. You know, I think at the end of the day, what we should take from that is that sometimes things that seem like they suck are actually really interesting, and maybe we should just be a little bit more discerning about the things that we pay attention to, and maybe don't come to such easy conclusions about these things, you know? Maybe pay attention to the tax code, you know? Maybe call your senator or something. I don't know. It's something. Anyway, that's The Pale King. I'll see you later.